seat. I think Richard Sherman came out and said he wouldn't be surprised if Steve Wilks was let go during the bye week, which might have been a little bit shock value thing because he went on to explain more about scheme and changing him needing to switch up versus just like not being the defensive coordinator, also who would take over for him. But do you think that this adding another stud player on this puts more pressure on Steve Wilks? Like say they go out and they perform badly against Jacksonville, does that give the team maybe a higher opportunity to let him go? Or I did see John Lynch was asked about stopping the run and like the pass rush in his most recent press conference 2 days ago. And John Lynch was like, well, if you can't stop the run, then the pass rush won't be effective. So do you think like, okay, they traded for another pass rusher and you could still give Steve Wilks an excuse if the sacks aren't coming? Or do you think at this point you're like, okay, you have all the talent in the world. If you're not making something of this, a lot of blame is going to continue to go on you?
Look, if Steve Wilks can't figure it out with this defense, with the personnel on this unit, I think that he has to come under fire. I do think the Niners' struggles are twofold. I think it comes down to the players not being able to produce. They're just missing out on some of these sacks. If you go back and look at Bosa's game against the Bengals, he was so close to sacking Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow was just able to get the ball out in the nick of time. So I think the players need to do a better job. Bosa finishing, Eric Armstead, Javon Hargrave hasn't really done anything since week 3, that Thursday night game against the New York Giants when he kind of broke out a little bit. There's a little bit of the players not doing their job, but Bosa, Hargrave, they're getting double teamed a lot. And again, I think the addition of Chase Young is just going to allow everybody else to maybe get more one-on-one matchups, and then the sacks will start to come. There was some progress against the Bengals. Eric Armstead able to get home a couple of times. Yeah. And I think that Richard Sherman did make some good points on his podcast. He was asked what changes he would make if he was the defensive coordinator. And he'd say, I'd go back to the basics. I'd go back to the strengths of what made this defense great and what's made this defensive unit really good since 2019 under Robert Saleh. Enough with the twists, enough with the stunts. Let's just go 4-man pass rush and allow the dogs to eat. And in turn, if you're able to win those matchups up front, it makes the secondary's job, which has been exposed over the last couple of weeks, a little bit easier. I do think there's something to be said for those units being synced up, and I don't think that they've been synced up. And if you think about some of like the twist stunts and all that stuff, the Niners are just missing out on these sacks. So if Nick Bosa is lined up at the edge and then he takes that brief second to kind of come around another defensive player on that twist, on that stunt, maybe that's the difference between Bosa getting a sack and not. And then that's the difference between a wide receiver breaking free, which then makes the secondary look bad. So there has to be this type of synergy. I mean, you kind of look at it as a 3-level machine. It's the defensive line, it's the linebackers, and it's the secondary. And sometimes those units are tied together. And right now, they're not tied together. I also think that while Richard Sherman did rip Steve Wilks and the scheme that he's been running, because he said it's weird what they're doing, he did say later, when asked if he would want to be the defensive coordinator, he said, I trust Kyle and John because I believe they have the right people in place. And the NFL is really hard. Throughout the course of a season, adjustments are made. You go through rough patches. Hopefully this batch of adversity for San Francisco is going to help them down the road, because right now they haven't responded well to it, but they can all turn that around on their own watch.
Definitely. And I think for me, it's kind of hard when people say like, oh, they've been 3-5 before, because I do think there's a difference morale-wise in kind of starting slow and then building back up. I think it's kind of hard when you feel like you're on a high and then all of a sudden you dip down, and you, as players, you start to wonder, like, is this a fluke or is this like some sort of fundamental flaw? I'm really glad that they did make a trade, because I think if Chase Young has like any production, I think that could like cause a bit of motivation, or maybe not motivation, but like inspiration within the other players. Just kind of knowing that the front office still believes in them. I saw Stephanie Sanchez, who does 49ers content, say that John Lynch was going to need to make a choice with whether or not he believed in this team enough to like invest in capital to go and make a trade. And I think it's kind of nice that he was able to do make that trade without investing much. I was hoping that they would get a corner. I think the secondary has been really struggling. Ward looks a lot. Ward's been just getting beaten way more than he was last year. He does not look like a solid number one. Now, I don't know if that's because the pass rush is doing so poorly that he's getting more exposed. Also, I think it is important. All offseason, he was dealing with that heel injury, right? So
Yeah.
it's very possible. I don't really hear people talking about that when they talk about him, but I feel like it's probably possible that either that affected his ability to like train properly up until the season, or it could still be bothering him, like not enough to prevent him from playing. But he seems to have really regressed and taken a step back. Isaiah Oliver is not the best. I think Demo has impressed me from maybe like when he was drafted, but they don't have a solid, number one shutdown guy. So, and
Yeah.
I think they built their team that way. Like they invested all their money in the front end, thinking that that was what was going to, be the foundation of this team. So just now that that's not working as well, I feel like that exposes the secondary and
It
brings the
does.
secondary a lot more criticism than maybe it would have if the defense was doing what it should. And honestly, if Nick Bosa was doing what it should, because when you look at the number of sacks that the team has compared to last year, it's actually similar, minus the fact that Nick Bosa had like 10 sacks right now. But all
Yeah.
the other guys got about the same amount. Now they were a lot better at stopping the run, but that's a different thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, yeah, the run defense is certainly a problem too, because there's that old adage, right? Like the run game opens up the pass game, and that is totally true. And San Francisco has been oddly bad against the run. I did had some fears about that because Javon Hargrave is more known as a pass rusher and not a run stuffer. That was the case last year with Philadelphia. His Pro Football Focus run grade wasn't all that good, but look, in
Yeah, they're
today's
probably happy, right? Like they got to replace him with like a cheaper, better, like because Jalen Carter is like in
Jalen
his
Carter's a beast. I mean,
yeah.
he's been one of the highest graded interior defensive linemen in the NFL. So that's a
Eagles
great
fan.
move for Philadelphia. Cheaper player who's honestly been somewhat better than Hargrave. But, you think about the weapons that you have to go up against in the NFL at wide receiver. You think about the two good quarterbacks that the Niners have faced in Kirk Cousins and Joe Burrow the last 2 weeks, the good schemes that are all across the league. If you can't generate a pass rush, I don't care if Deion Sanders, Asante Samuel, and Ronnie Lott are back there. Like, you're going to get picked apart because they can only hold up so long against the pass. So it really does all come down to that pass rush. Now, I would have liked to have seen a move at cornerback. Jalen Johnson would have been a great move because I think he's a franchise building block over the next couple of years. I would have given up a first-round pick for Patrick Surtain because I think that you can win with those players long-term. But again, if the sack numbers start to come, we just won't see the secondary get exposed all that much. But I think it's become somewhat apparent. Like, I think that Mooney Ward is more of a 1B or a 2. I think Diamador Lenore, if you got another top-tier corner, would be an incredible slot because he's a little bit undersized on the outside. But for the Niners, they looked at this evaluation and they said, look, this comes down to our pass rush winning. And if the pass rush wins, everything will be cool on that back end. And keep in mind, they have a couple of really good safeties too in Talanoa Hufanga and Tashawn Gibson.
They do. I've been pretty disappointed with that entire secondary because Hufanga, it's not looking. I mean, he's been okay, but everyone's like missing tackles nowadays. What is up with that?
32 in
Me,
the
that's like
3-game losing streak. It's unbelievable.
yeah, to me, and I wonder, that is where I kind of, it's hard, right? Because I think there's sometimes where it's okay to blame coaching and sometimes where it's like, okay, well, that's on the player. And there's been some viral clips going around where like there was no reason that Joe Burrow was not being sacked. There was like 5 guys around him. Or I reference in that Bengals game, Joe Burrow was running out to the left and Ward had like an easy, all he had to do was wrap up and he just like put his hand out and then like dove to the side of Joe Burrow, and stuff like that is like business decision-y, which kind of bothers me when we talk about like the 49ers identity.